The blue glow of my computer screen painted shadows across my cluttered home office as I typed the final lines of code for another thankless client. 3 empty coffee cups sat like monuments to my dedication, and the clock read 11:47 p.m. Another late night in the glamorous life of a freelance IT consultant. That's when I saw the headlights sweep across my window. A sleek black BMW pulled into my driveway, its engine purring like a satisfied cat. Through the windshield, I could make out 2 figures silhouetted against the dashboard light. The passenger door opened, and my wife Sarah stepped out, her auburn hair catching the streetlight as she leaned back toward the driver's window. I recognized that car. It belonged to her boss, Richard Blackwood, the regional director at Pinnacle Insurance, where Sarah worked as a claims supervisor. What the hell was he doing dropping off my wife at midnight? From my office window, I watched them talk through the open car door. Sarah was laughing at something he said, her hand resting on the window frame. Then I saw it. His hand reaching out to touch hers, their fingers intertwining for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 seconds. My stomach dropped like a stone through water. Sarah finally pulled away, waving goodbye with a smile that I hadn't seen directed at me in months. She walked toward our front door with a spring in her step. I heard her key in the lock, the soft click of her heels on our hardwood floor. I was already standing in the hallway when she rounded the corner. "Jesus!" Sarah jumped, her purse flying from her shoulder to clatter on the floor. "You scared me. What are you doing lurking in the dark?" "Where were you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the hurricane brewing in my chest. "Work dinner ran late with the team," she said, bending to collect her scattered belongings. "You know how these corporate things go." "Your boss dropped you off." Sarah's hands paused for just a fraction of a second before continuing to gather her things. "Yeah, he gave me a ride. My car's still at the office." "At midnight?" "The dinner went long, and we had a few drinks afterward." Her voice carried that defensive edge I'd learned to recognize over our 15 years of marriage. Richard was being nice, offering to drive instead of letting me call an Uber. I leaned against the doorframe, studying her face. "Where's your car exactly?" "At the office parking lot. That's why he drove me home." She stood up, clutching her purse like a shield. "Here's the thing about being an IT consultant. You develop certain habits, like checking on things, like driving by your wife's office at 10 p.m. when she texts that she'll be working late, only to find the entire parking lot empty except for a security guard's pickup truck." "Funny thing," I said. "I drove by your office around 10. Parking lot was completely empty. Your car wasn't there." The color drained from Sarah's face like someone had pulled a plug. "You were checking on me?" I ignored her question. "So, where were you really?" She tried to push past me toward the stairs. "I'm tired, Michael. Can we talk about this tomorrow?" I stepped sideways, blocking her path. "We're talking now." That's when the dam burst. Sarah's composure cracked like ice under pressure, and the tears started flowing. "Okay, fine. We went to the Marriott bar for drinks after dinner. Just drinks. Nothing else. I didn't want you to worry about me being at a hotel bar." "Why lie about the location?" "Because I knew you'd react exactly like this." She gestured wildly at my face. "I knew you'd make it into something it wasn't." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Too late for that, sweetheart." I pulled out my phone and opened the photo gallery. For the past month, something had felt off about Sarah's behavior. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way she'd started dressing up for work like she was going to Fashion Week instead of processing insurance claims. So I'd hired a private investigator named Tony Castellanos, a former cop who specialized in matrimonial cases. Tony's photos were worth every penny of his $500 retainer. I held up the first image, Sarah and Richard at a candlelit table in the Marriott restaurant, their hands clasped across the white tablecloth like lovers in a romance novel. The timestamp read 7:23 p.m. Sarah's mouth fell open. "That's not what it looks like." I swiped to the next photo. Sarah and Richard in the hotel parking lot, her arms wrapped around his neck, their lips locked in a kiss that definitely wasn't a friendly goodbye. Timestamp, 8:45 p.m. How about this one? The third photo showed them entering the hotel elevator together, Richard's hand on the small of Sarah's back. Timestamp, 9:02 p.m. You were there for 3 hours, I said, my voice as flat as roadkill. Want to explain what kind of drinks last 3 hours in a hotel room? Sarah was speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Finally, she managed, Please, let me explain. It's not what you think. I stepped aside and pointed toward the front door. Explain it to my lawyer. Michael, wait! She followed me as I walked toward our bedroom and started pulling suitcases from the closet. Don't do this, please. Just listen to me. I began packing her clothes with mechanical precision, folding each item like I was preparing for a business trip to hell. Richard means nothing to me, she said, her voice rising in desperation. It was a mistake, a stupid, meaningless mistake. I'll quit my job tomorrow if that's what it takes. I kept packing, saying nothing. I love you, not him, she cried. We can work through this. Couples therapy, whatever you want. I'll do anything. I paused and looked at her. You loved me, past tense. She caught the grammatical correction immediately. What? You said you love me, but the truth is you loved me, past tense. Before you decided to screw your boss in a hotel room. Please, she whispered, don't throw away 15 years over one mistake. I pointed toward the front door. Leave tonight. This is my house too. I pulled a folded document from my nightstand drawer. Not according to our prenup. Section 12, subsection C, infidelity clause, house stays with the faithful spouse. Sarah's face went white as she read the legal language we'd both signed when we bought this place 10 years ago. Back then, she'd insisted on the prenup, claiming it was just smart financial planning. Funny how life comes full circle. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Richard's contact information. Sarah had programmed it into my phone herself during a company barbecue last summer, claiming it was important for me to have her boss's number, just in case. I called him on speaker. The phone rang twice before his smooth voice answered. Hey, beautiful. Miss me already? Sarah lunged for the phone, but I held it away from her. Actually, Richard, this is Michael, Sarah's husband. Remember me? You just dropped my wife off at our house. Silence stretched across the line like a tightrope. She needs a place to stay tonight, I continued. Since you two are so close, I figured you might have room. The line went dead. I looked at Sarah with mock surprise. He hung up. How rude. My phone immediately started ringing. The caller ID showed Mom, with a photo of Sarah's mother, Margaret, a stern woman who'd never quite approved of me, but had at least maintained civility for the sake of family peace. I answered on speaker. Hello, Margaret. Michael, what on earth is going on? I just got some very disturbing photos from an unknown number. I looked at Sarah, whose eyes had gone wide with horror. I thought your family should know what kind of woman they raised. Are these photos real? Margaret's voice was sharp as broken glass. Sarah made a grab for the phone. Mom, don't listen to him. Sarah, is that you? What is the meaning of this? Margaret's voice rose an octave. These photos show you kissing another man. Mom, I can explain. I raised you better than this. Your father and I taught you about commitment, about honor, about keeping your wedding vows sacred. The line went dead as Margaret hung up in disgust. Within minutes, Sarah's phone started buzzing like an angry wasp. Text messages flooded in from her family group chat. Her sister Jennifer. Mom sent the photos to everyone. Are you seriously having an affair? Her brother David. What the hell is wrong with you? Her cousin Lisa. I can't believe you do this to Michael. Sarah stared at her phone screen as her entire family learned about her betrayal in real time. The woman who'd always prided herself on being the responsible one, the good daughter, the perfect wife, watched her reputation crumble with each incoming message. Richard wasn't answering his phone. Her family was disgusted with her. Her husband was throwing her out of the house. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she was probably realizing that her midnight arrival had become a midnight disaster. "I tried to explain," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But you already had your mind made up." I zipped up the last suitcase and set it by the bedroom door. The evidence spoke louder than your explanations ever could. As I watched my wife of 15 years realize that her carefully constructed life was falling apart, I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest where my heart used to be. She'd wanted to play games? Fine. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I was really, really good at games. And I was just getting started. The next morning, I woke up alone for the first time in 15 years. The silence in the house felt different, not peaceful, but empty, like the aftermath of an explosion. Sarah had finally left around 2 a.m., dragging her suitcases to her Honda Civic, while our neighbor Mrs. Patterson watched from her window like she was witnessing a car accident. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through the digital carnage on social media. Sarah had posted a vague status update at 3 a.m. "Going through a difficult time. Please respect my privacy." The comments section was already filling up with concerned friends and family members demanding details. My phone rang. Derek Morrison, my best friend since college and the owner of Morrison's Auto Repair, was calling. "Dude, what the hell happened last night? Jenny Patterson called my mom at 6 this morning, said she saw Sarah leaving your place with suitcases. She was cheating with her boss. I caught them." Derek whistled low. "Damn, man. I'm sorry. You okay?" "I'm better than okay. I'm free." "That's the spirit. You want to grab breakfast? We can talk about it." "Actually, I need a favor. Can you come over? I want to install some security cameras." "Security cameras? Why?" "Because this is just the beginning." Derek arrived an hour later with his toolkit and a box of wireless cameras he'd ordered for his own shop. While we worked on mounting them around my property, I filled him in on the details of Sarah's affair and my plans for revenge. "Look, Mike," Derek said, adjusting a camera angle to cover my driveway. "I get that you're pissed, but maybe you should just let the lawyers handle this and move on with your life. She destroyed 15 years of marriage for some corporate sleazeball. She lied to my face for months. She made me look like a fool." I tightened the mounting bracket with more force than necessary. "I'm not moving on. I'm moving forward." "What's the difference?" "Moving on means accepting what happened and walking away. Moving forward means making sure there are consequences." Derek paused his work and looked at me. "You're starting to sound a little scary, man." "Good. Maybe it's time people stopped underestimating me." That afternoon, I drove to Pinnacle Insurance. The building was a bland 3-story rectangle of glass and concrete that housed about 200 employees across various departments. I parked across the street and waited. At 4:30 p.m., I spotted Richard's BMW in the executive parking section. At 5:15, I watched him walk out of the building, checking his phone constantly. He looked nervous, like a man who knew his world was about to collapse. I followed him to the Riverside Tavern, a upscale bar where the insurance crowd liked to unwind after work. Through the window, I could see him sitting alone at the bar, nursing what looked like whiskey and staring at his phone. I walked in and took the stool next to him. "Rough day?" I asked casually. Richard nearly jumped out of his skin. "What are you doing here?" "Having a drink, same as you." I ordered a beer from the bartender. "Though I imagine your day was rougher than mine." "Look, Michael, about last night." "What about it?" "You mean when you dropped off my wife after spending 3 hours screwing her in a hotel room?" The bartender, a young woman with purple hair, Suddenly found the glasses at the other end of the bar very interesting. "It's not what you think," Richard said, his voice low. "Really? Because I think you've been having an affair with my wife for at least a month. I think you've been using your position as her boss to manipulate her into sleeping with you. And I think you're about to find out what happens when you mess with the wrong man's family." Richard stood up and threw a 20 on the bar. "I don't have to listen to this." "No, you don't. But you're going to anyway." I remained seated, taking a slow sip of my beer. "See, Richard, you made a mistake. You assumed I was just some harmless IT nerd who would roll over and take it. But the thing about IT nerds is we're really good at finding information. What's that supposed to mean?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo that Tony, the PI, had taken. Richard entering the same hotel with a different woman 3 months ago. "Recognize her? That's Amanda Chen from your accounting department. Married, 2 kids, husband works construction." Richard's face went pale. "Oh, and here's another one." I swiped to show him with yet another woman. Jessica Torres from claims processing. Also married. Husband's a cop, by the way. "How did you get these photos?" "I hired a professional. Turns out you have quite the pattern, Richard. You like married women, probably because they're less likely to cause problems when you get bored and move on to the next one." Richard sat back down heavily. "What do you want?" "I want you to understand something. My wife was just another conquest to you, but she was my life. And now that life is over because you couldn't keep it in your pants. I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen, and now we're all going to live with the consequences." I finished my beer and stood up. "Oh, and Richard, you might want to check your email when you get home. I sent some interesting photos to your wife's personal account. Figured she deserved to know what kind of man she married." I walked out of the bar, leaving Richard staring into his whiskey like it might contain answers to questions he didn't want to ask. When I got home, I found Sarah sitting on my front porch steps. She looked like she'd been crying for hours, her makeup smeared and her hair disheveled. "We need to talk," she said. "No, we don't. Michael, please. I made a mistake, but we can fix this." The only mistake was thinking I wouldn't find out. I walked past her toward my front door. "I stayed at Jennifer's last night," she called after me. "But she kicked me out this morning after Mom called her. My whole family has disowned me." I turned around. "That sounds like a you problem." "Where am I supposed to go? I lost my job today. HR called me into a meeting and said they were letting me go due to inappropriate workplace conduct. I can't afford an apartment without my salary." "Should have thought about that before you decided to sleep with your boss." "I have nowhere else to go." "I hear Richard has a nice house." "Oh, wait. His wife probably kicked him out too after she saw those photos." Sarah's face crumpled. "You sent photos to his wife?" "I sent photos to everyone who mattered. Your family, your co-workers, his co-workers. I figured the truth should be shared as widely as possible." "You're destroying my life." "I'm not destroying anything. I'm just making sure everyone knows who you really are." I went inside and locked the door behind me, leaving Sarah on the porch. Through the security camera feed on my phone, I watched her sit there for another hour before finally driving away. That night, I opened a bottle of wine and sat in my home office, reading the flood of messages and emails that had poured in throughout the day. Some were supportive, expressing sympathy for what I was going through. Others were from mutual friends who were shocked by the revelations. But the most interesting message came from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Jay." I stared at the text for a long moment, then typed back, "Who is this?" The response came quickly. "Jenna Walsh, Sarah's friend from work. Meet me tomorrow at Cafe Luna, noon. Come alone." Jenna Walsh. I knew the name. Sarah had mentioned her frequently. They'd worked together in the claims department before Jenna moved to human resources. Sarah had always described her as a close friend and confidant. I typed back, "Why would I want to meet with you?" "Because there are things about Sarah's affair you don't know. Things that might change how you feel about what happened." I stared at the message for a long time before responding, "I'll be there." As I got ready for bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. The affair, the photos, the public humiliation, it all felt too easy, too straightforward. In my experience, nothing was ever that simple, but I was about to learn that sometimes the truth is far more complicated than it appears on the surface. Cafe Luna was one of those trendy coffee shops that charged $6 for a latte and filled their walls with local artwork that nobody could afford. I arrived 5 minutes early and chose a corner table where I could see the entire restaurant. Jenna Walsh walked in at exactly noon, and I recognized her immediately from the company Christmas parties Sarah had dragged me to over the years. She was a tall, angular woman in her early 40s with short black hair and the kind of intense stare that made you feel like you were being evaluated. "Michael," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for coming." "Get to the point, Jenna. I'm not in the mood for small talk." She ordered a green tea from the waitress, then leaned forward with her hands clasped on the table. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I need you to hear me out." "I'm listening." "Sarah's affair wasn't random. It was orchestrated." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Right. Richard forced her to sleep with him at gunpoint." "Not by Richard. By me." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What?" "I manipulated Sarah into having that affair. I planted the seeds, created the opportunities, and pushed them together until it happened." I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. "Why would you do that?" "Because I wanted to destroy your marriage." The cafe suddenly felt too warm, too crowded, too loud. "You wanted to destroy my marriage? Why?" Jenna took a sip of her tea, her hands remarkably steady for someone confessing to psychological warfare. "Do you remember 5 years ago when you fired me from your consulting business?" The memory came flooding back. I'd hired Jenna as a part-time bookkeeper when my business was expanding. She'd lasted 3 months before I discovered she was skimming money from client payments and falsifying invoices. "You were stealing from me," I said. "I took what I was worth. You were paying me half what you'd pay a man for the same work." "I was paying you exactly what we agreed on, and theft is theft, regardless of your gender. You destroyed my reputation. After you fired me, word got around the business community. I couldn't find work for 8 months. I lost my apartment, had to move back in with my mother at age 37. So you decided to destroy my marriage as revenge? I decided to show you what it felt like to lose everything because of someone else's actions." I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. "How?" "It wasn't hard. Sarah was already feeling neglected. You worked long hours, traveled frequently for clients, barely paid attention to her anymore. She was ripe for manipulation." "Manipulation how?" "I started small. Girls' nights out where I'd fill her head with stories about how other women were treated by their husbands, how they felt appreciated, desired, valued. I'd point out successful, attractive men at bars and restaurants, commenting on how attentive they were to their wives." My stomach was churning, but I needed to hear this. "Then I started working on Richard. He's always been a predator. I had files on his previous affairs from my HR position. I made sure Sarah was assigned to projects that required direct interaction with him. I scheduled meetings that ran late, created situations where they'd be alone together." "Sarah still made the choice to cheat." "Did she? After months of me telling her she deserved better, that you didn't appreciate her, that she was wasting her life with a man who cared more about his computers than his wife? After I made sure she was working closely with a master manipulator who knew exactly how to exploit lonely, vulnerable women?" I wanted to argue, but the pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Sarah's gradual change in behavior, her newfound interest in working late, her sudden friendship with Jenna after years of casual workplace acquaintance. "You orchestrated everything. I created the perfect storm, but I have to admit, I didn't expect you to respond the way you did. The private investigator, the photos, the public humiliation, that was all you. I thought you'd just divorce her quietly and split everything 50-50. Instead, I destroyed her life. You became exactly what I hoped you'd become, a villain, someone who would hurt an innocent person just like you hurt me. I stared at Jenna across the table, realizing I was looking at someone far more dangerous than I'd ever imagined. Sarah wasn't innocent. She still chose to cheat. Sarah was a pawn. We were both pawns. The only difference is that you chose to become a monster. And what about you? What does that make you? Jenna smiled, and it was the coldest expression I'd ever seen on a human face. It makes me someone who got exactly what she wanted. She stood up and left a $5 bill on the table for her tea. Enjoy your victory, Michael. I hope it was worth it. I sat alone in the cafe for another hour, staring at my untouched coffee and trying to make sense of what I'd learned. Sarah had been manipulated, but she'd still made choices. Jenna had orchestrated the affair, but I'd chosen to respond with nuclear-level revenge. And now all three of us were trapped in a web of consequences that none of us could escape. My phone buzzed with a text from Derek. Heard Sarah got fired. You okay? I typed back, meet me at your shop, we need to talk. As I drove across town to Morrison's auto repair, I couldn't shake the image of Jenna's smile. She'd won. She'd turned me into exactly the kind of person I'd always despised, someone who destroyed lives for personal satisfaction. But if Jenna thought the game was over, she was about to learn that she'd made a crucial miscalculation. I wasn't done playing. Derek was waiting for me in his office, a cluttered space above the garage that smelled like motor oil and coffee. I told him everything. Jenna's confession, her manipulation of Sarah, her 5-year plan for revenge. Jesus Christ, Derek said when I finished. This woman is a psychopath. She's also right about one thing. I became a monster. No, man. You were protecting yourself. Sarah cheated regardless of who pushed her toward it. I destroyed her life, Derek. I took photos of her most private moments and shared them with her family. I got her fired from her job. I left her homeless and broke. She made her choices. But were they really her choices? Or was she just dancing to Jenna's tune? Derek leaned back in his chair, studying my face. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Jenna Walsh needs to learn what real consequences look like. Mike, don't do anything stupid. I'm not going to hurt her physically, but she destroyed 2 marriages and ruined 3 lives for the sake of a 5-year grudge. That can't go unpunished. What about Sarah? I was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. Maybe we're both victims. Maybe we're both guilty. But either way, Jenna wins unless someone stops her. How? I pulled out my phone and showed Derek a screenshot of Jenna's LinkedIn profile. She's the HR director at Pinnacle Insurance now. She has access to personnel files, salary information, disciplinary records, everything she'd need to manipulate and blackmail employees. You think she's done this before? I think Sarah and I aren't her only victims, and I think it's time someone exposed her for what she really is. Derek shook his head. You're talking about going to war with someone who spent 5 years planning revenge against you. Someone who's clearly smarter and more patient than you realized. Then I guess I better get smarter and more patient. As I drove home that evening, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my life had been wrong. My marriage hadn't failed because Sarah and I had grown apart. It had been systematically destroyed by someone with the patience and skill to play a 5-year-long game. But if Jenna thought she was the only one who could plan for the long term, she was about to discover her mistake. The war was just beginning. I spent the next 3 days learning everything I could about Jenna Walsh. Social media profiles, employment history, financial records, court documents. By the time I was finished, I knew more about her life than most people knew about their own families. The picture that emerged was disturbing. Jenna had a pattern of targeting people she felt had wronged her, then systematically destroying their lives over months or years. A former roommate who'd kicked her out for not paying rent had mysteriously lost 3 different jobs due to anonymous complaints about her work performance. A college boyfriend who'd broken up with her had his medical school application sabotaged when someone sent the admissions committee photos of him drinking underage at parties. But the most interesting discovery was her current situation at Pinnacle Insurance. According to the company's internal directory, which I'd accessed through a security vulnerability in their website, Jenna had been promoted to HR director just 6 months ago, right around the time Sarah's affair with Richard had begun. I called Tony Castellanos, the private investigator who'd documented Sarah's affair. "I need you to investigate someone else," I told him. "Your wife's boyfriend?" "Her friend, the one who orchestrated the whole thing." I gave Tony everything I'd learned about Jenna, along with a list of specific things I wanted him to investigate. Her financial records, her communications, her relationships with other Pinnacle employees, and most importantly, any evidence that she'd used her HR position to manipulate or blackmail other workers. "This is going to be expensive," Tony warned. "Deep background investigations take time and resources." "Money's not an issue. I want to know everything." While Tony worked on the investigation, I focused on my own research. I created fake social media profiles and began connecting with current and former Pinnacle Insurance employees. I posed as a freelance journalist, writing an article about workplace harassment and discrimination in the insurance industry. The responses were eye-opening. Amanda Chen, the accounting department employee Richard had previously had an affair with, agreed to speak with me anonymously. According to Amanda, Jenna had approached her shortly after she'd started working at Pinnacle, offering friendship and support as a fellow woman in a male-dominated industry. "She seemed so understanding," Amanda told me during a phone interview. "She'd listened to me complain about my marriage, about feeling unappreciated at home. Then she started suggesting that maybe I deserve better." "Did she ever suggest anything specific?" "She'd point out how successful and attractive some of the male executives were, how they treated their wives like queens. She made it sound like having an affair was almost empowering." "What happened after your affair with Richard ended?" "Jenna was the one who ended it. She told me that Richard was getting bored, that he was already looking at other women. She said I should break it off before he dumped me and made me look pathetic." "How did you feel about that?" "Grateful, at the time. I thought she was protecting me, but looking back, it's like she was managing the whole situation, like she was running some kind of experiment." I interviewed 3 other women with similar stories. All had been approached by Jenna during vulnerable periods in their lives. All had been guided toward affairs with married male executives, and all had been convinced to end those affairs before they could become serious relationships. The pattern was clear. Jenna wasn't just manipulating people for personal revenge. She was collecting leverage, building a network of secrets, and compromised individuals that she could control. Tony called me a week later with his findings. "This woman is dangerous," he said, without preamble. "I've never seen anything like this." "What did you find?" "Financial irregularities going back 3 years. She's been skimming money from the company's employee assistance fund. Small amounts, but consistently. She's also been accessing personnel files without authorization and copying confidential information." "Any idea why?" "Blackmail. I found evidence that she's been pressuring employees to do favors for her in exchange for keeping their secrets. An accountant who's been fudging expense reports, a claims adjuster who's been approving fraudulent claims, a security guard who's been selling information about company investigations." Jesus. It gets worse. I think she's been planning to take down the entire company. She's been documenting every illegal or unethical activity she can find, building a case that would destroy Pinnacle's reputation and probably land several executives in prison. Why? Best guess? She's planning to sell the information to a competitor or use it to extort a massive settlement from the company. I sat in my car outside Tony's office, staring at the folder full of evidence he'd given me. Jenna wasn't just a vengeful ex-employee with a grudge. She was a criminal who'd been using my marriage as practice for a much larger scheme. My phone rang. Sarah's number appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want?" "I need to see you." Her voice was shaky, desperate. "Something's wrong. Something's really wrong." "Where are you?" "The Motel 6 on Highway 9, room 127. Please, Michael, I think I'm in danger." Against my better judgment, I drove to the motel. It was one of those places where people went to disappear. Faded paint, broken neon signs, and the kind of clientele that paid in cash and didn't ask questions. Sarah answered the door looking like she'd aged 10 years in the past week. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes had the haunted look of someone who'd seen too much. "Thank God you came," she said, pulling me inside. The room was a disaster. Clothes scattered everywhere, empty takeout containers on every surface, and the curtains drawn tight against the daylight. "What's going on, Sarah?" "It's Jenna. She's been calling me, texting me, showing up wherever I go. She says she has more photos, more evidence that could destroy what's left of my life." "What kind of evidence?" "I don't know, but she's demanding money, $5,000, or she'll release everything to the media." I sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. "Sarah, there's something you need to know about Jenna." I told her everything. The manipulation, the orchestrated affair, the 5-year revenge plan, the blackmail scheme at Pinnacle Insurance. By the time I finished, Sarah was crying again. "She destroyed us," Sarah whispered. "She destroyed our marriage, our lives, everything we built together. We still made choices, Sarah. You still chose to cheat, and I still chose to destroy your life in response. But we were manipulated. We were played against each other. Does that change anything? Can we go back and undo the damage?" Sarah looked at me with something that might have been hope. "Maybe we can undo it, but maybe we can stop her from doing it to someone else." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we work together. For the first time in months, we stop being enemies and start being partners." I stared at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, and realized she was right. Jenna had won because she'd divided us, turned us against each other while she pulled the strings from the shadows. But what if we stopped fighting each other and started fighting her? "What do you have in mind?" Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. "She's meeting me tomorrow night to collect her money. What if we recorded the conversation? Got her to confess to everything? That's not enough. We need more than just a confession." "Then what?" I thought about the folder of evidence sitting in my car, about the network of victims Jenna had created, about the company she was planning to destroy. "We give her exactly what she wants," I said. "We let her think she's won, and then we destroy her the same way she destroyed us." "How?" I smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it felt genuine. "We're going to orchestrate the biggest public humiliation in this town's history." The Riverside Community Festival was the biggest event of the year in our small town. Every local business set up booths, families brought picnic baskets, and the mayor gave a speech about community values and supporting local entrepreneurs. It was exactly the kind of wholesome public event where a scandal would have maximum impact. Sarah and I spent 2 weeks planning our revenge against Jenna Walsh. We'd recorded her blackmail demands, gathered evidence of her manipulation of multiple Pinnacle employees, and documented her theft from the company's Employee Assistance Fund. But we wanted more than just justice. We wanted the same kind of public humiliation she'd orchestrated for us. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked as we sat in my car outside the festival grounds. "Once we do this, there's no going back." She spent 5 years destroying our marriage for the sake of a grudge. She manipulated you into an affair, turned me into a monster, and blackmailed dozens of innocent people. She deserves everything that's coming to her. Sarah nodded, but I could see the nervousness in her eyes. What happens to us afterward? It was a question I'd been avoiding for days. Working together to expose Jenna had reminded me why I'd fallen in love with Sarah in the first place. She was smart, determined, and when she wasn't being manipulated by a psychopath, she was a good person who'd made a terrible mistake. I don't know, I admitted, but let's focus on stopping her first. The festival was in full swing when we arrived. Families wandered between booths selling funnel cakes and handmade crafts. Children ran around with balloons and cotton candy, and a local band played cover songs on the main stage. Jenna was working the Pinnacle Insurance booth, smiling and shaking hands with potential customers like she was running for mayor. She was wearing a bright blue dress and had styled her hair in a way that made her look younger, more approachable. "She looks so normal," Sarah said. "The best predators always do." At 2 p.m., the mayor introduced the afternoon's guest speakers, local business leaders who would talk about economic development and community partnership. Richard Blackwood was supposed to be one of the speakers, representing Pinnacle Insurance, but he'd called in sick that morning. Jenna had volunteered to take his place. She walked onto the stage with confidence, adjusting the microphone and smiling at the crowd of about 300 people gathered on the grass in front of the bandstand. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began. "I'm Jenna Walsh, Human Resources Director at Pinnacle Insurance. I'm here today to talk about the importance of trust and integrity in our business community." That was my cue. I walked up to the side of the stage and caught the attention of the sound technician, a teenager named Kyle who worked part-time for the city's parks department. "Excuse me," I said. "I need to make an emergency announcement. There's been an accident." Kyle looked confused, but handed me a wireless microphone. I walked onto the stage where Jenna was still speaking about corporate responsibility and community values. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying across the festival grounds through the PA system. "Sorry to interrupt, but I have something important to share with everyone." Jenna turned to stare at me, her face going pale as she recognized me. "What are you doing?" "I'm here to talk about trust and integrity," I said, addressing the crowd. "Specifically, about what happens when someone violates that trust." Murmurs rippled through the audience. People were pulling out their phones, sensing that something dramatic was about to happen. "2 weeks ago, I discovered that my wife was having an affair with her boss," I continued. "I was angry, hurt, and I responded by publicly humiliating both of them. I destroyed my wife's reputation, got her fired from her job, and turned our divorce into a public spectacle." Jenna tried to take the microphone from me, but I stepped away from her. What I didn't know at the time was that the affair had been orchestrated by someone else, someone who had spent 5 years planning to destroy my marriage as revenge for a perceived slight. I pointed at Jenna. This woman, Jenna Walsh, systematically manipulated my wife into having an affair. She created opportunities for them to be alone together, filled my wife's head with stories about how she deserved better, and pushed them into a relationship that destroyed our family. The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. But my marriage wasn't her only target. Over the past 3 years, Jenna has manipulated at least 6 other Pinnacle Insurance employees into compromising situations, then used that information to blackmail them. I pulled out my phone and activated the Bluetooth connection to the PA system that Kyle had helped me set up earlier. "This is a recording of Jenna demanding $5,000 from my wife in exchange for not releasing additional compromising photos to the media." Jenna's voice filled the festival grounds, clear and unmistakable. "You have until Friday to get me the money, Sarah. $5,000, or I release everything to Channel 7 News. Your affair with Richard was just the beginning. I have photos of you with other men, doctored but convincing enough to destroy what's left of your reputation." The crowd gasped. Jenna lunged for my phone, but Derek Morrison had appeared on the other side of the stage and blocked her path. "She's also been stealing money from Pinnacle's Employee Assistance Fund," I continued. "Money that was supposed to help workers going through financial hardships, and she's been collecting confidential information about the company's illegal activities, planning to sell that information to competitors. I looked directly at Jenna, who was standing frozen in the middle of the stage like a deer caught in headlights. 5 years ago, I fired Jenna from my consulting business for stealing money and falsifying invoices. Instead of learning from her mistake, she decided to destroy my life in response. She turned my wife and me against each other, manipulated us into becoming the worst versions of ourselves, and nearly succeeded in her plan for revenge. Sarah walked onto the stage, carrying a folder full of documents. "These are copies of financial records showing Jenna's theft from Pinnacle Insurance," Sarah announced, along with transcripts of recorded conversations where she admits to manipulating multiple employees into compromising situations. The festival crowd was buzzing with shocked conversations. I could see people calling the police, taking videos with their phones, and texting frantically to friends and family who weren't at the festival. Jenna finally found her voice. "This is all lies. They're trying to frame me because their marriage fell apart." "Really?" I said. "Then explain this." I played another recording, this one from my meeting with Jenna at Cafe Luna, where she'd confessed to orchestrating Sarah's affair and manipulating both of us for years. When her own voice finished playing through the PA system, admitting to everything I'd accused her of, Jenna's face crumpled. She looked out at the crowd of 300 people, her neighbors, co-workers, and community members, all staring at her with disgust and disbelief. "I want you all to understand something," I said, my voice carrying across the silent festival grounds. "Jenna Walsh is a predator. She identifies vulnerable people, manipulates them into compromising situations, and then uses their mistakes against them. She destroyed my marriage, ruined my wife's career, and blackmailed dozens of innocent people." I paused, looking out at the crowd. "But she also taught me something important. She showed me what I was capable of becoming when I let anger and revenge guide my actions. She turned me into a monster, and I let her do it." I turned to Sarah, who was standing beside me with tears in her eyes. "I can't undo the damage I caused when I publicly humiliated my wife. I can't take back the photos I shared or the pain I inflicted. But I can make sure that Jenna Walsh never has the opportunity to destroy another family." The sound of police sirens was getting louder. Someone in the crowd had called 911, and law enforcement was on their way to arrest Jenna for theft, blackmail, and fraud. As the police cars pulled up to the festival grounds, Jenna made one last desperate attempt to escape. She ran toward the edge of the stage, but Derek and 2 other men from the crowd blocked her path. "It's over, Jenna," I said. "You wanted to show me what it felt like to lose everything. Now you know." The police arrested Jenna Walsh in front of 300 witnesses and dozens of cell phone cameras. By that evening, videos of her arrest and confession were trending on social media across the entire state. Sarah and I stood together at the edge of the festival grounds, watching as the police car carrying Jenna disappeared into the distance. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now we figure out how to rebuild our lives," I said. "Both of us. Together." I looked at my wife, the woman I'd loved for 15 years, the woman I'd destroyed in a fit of rage, the woman who'd been manipulated into betraying everything we'd built together. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but maybe we can start by forgiving each other for the people we became when Jenna Walsh was pulling our strings." Sarah nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. "I'd like that." As we walked away from the festival grounds together, I realized that revenge had taught me something important. Destroying someone else's life doesn't heal your own wounds. It just creates new ones. But sometimes, stopping a predator from hurting other people is worth becoming a villain yourself, even if it cost you everything you thought you wanted.